Today's date is February 6, 1977. This is tape recording number 1 for Orleans County Historical Association. Speaking is Mary Schuler, member and director of the association, a resident of Gaines for 20 years. I am conversing with J. Howard Pratt, residing in town of Gaines for about 80 years. Mr. Pratt has been town historian for 16 years. As a youngster, he attended District Number 3 Country School, graduated from Albion High School in 1911. In the fall of the year, taught at Rich's Corners for $11 per week, moving then to Berry and other ungraded country schools. During the war, took position as 4-H county agent, then retired to farming at 12883 Ridge Road. The Cobblestone Society was formed and obtained ownership of the Cobblestone School at Childs. Mr. Pratt was asked to take charge of this school. Mr. Pratt, how did you develop this idle school into a real living school?
Well, in taking charge, I gathered books, maps, desks, any old thing which pertained to the old school of about 1900, and fitted out the school as I remember the schools of my boyhood days. When outfitted as it was then, I wished children to come and see the school museum. I invited to come and see the school one fourth grade of about 30 children from the fourth grade in Albion. They came and enjoyed a good time, and I was off for a start. Without any invitations sent out, the next year we had 400 children of about the fourth and fifth grades brought there by bus for one whole day's school work. Now I'm going to tell you how I received the children coming to that school. They come by bus, and usually nowadays about 50 or 60 with 2 teachers and 2 grades. I meet them as they step off in the bus and say, "Good morning, children. I am glad you brought a good day." Now, as we was having it in May and early June, the days would be good. It is much different from the days we are recording this, for we are going through with our January and February zero weather and bad storms. But in those old days, had we had a storm like this, I remember that only 2 or 3 days we ever had to quit school. I and my sister would climb over the snowbanks to gain the little school about a half a mile away, and we did not stop for any bad weather, except very bad days one or two at a time. Other times, the school ran continuously. You children have a good day, and we'll come up here to the outside of the school, and I will tell you just a little bit about the school before we enter. This old school was built in 1849 and was used for 101 years before it was closed and the children picked up by bus and taken to Albert. It is now about 127 years old. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the cobblestone school and how it was built. Some 10 or 12,000 years ago, the old lake that you see down by Oak Orchard and Lakeside and things was much larger than it is now. It really came up to this road. And as it is washing the stones clean down there in those olden days, some 10,000 years ago, it's doing the same thing up here at that time. It washed the stones, this being the lake shore. It washed the stones and left them here. And when the lake withdrew and went down to its present site, we have the Ridge Road, and we have banks of water-washed stones and sand and gravel that are very clean. And when the white man come to this county about little less than 200 years ago, he found many stones. He didn't know what to do with them, so he picked them up and put them in piles. And then he had more stone than he knew what to do with. So sometimes he built his houses out of the stone. The outside is the cobblestone that you see. That is only the veneer. But inside there's stones as large as you boys and girls' heads in there. A solid stone wall faced up on the outside with cobblestone stones. He took a little more pains in building as it went on. At first he did not keep the rows so straight. The little lines in between the rows of stones was not pronounced. But in later years, after about 15 to 20 years, he used a little more time and made that straight line which separates the stones. The stones were also gathered and sorted and put in one size, the smaller ones on the front, the next larger size on the sides, and the third larger size was placed in the back of the buildings. Now we can enter into the entry room. And here you find hooks where you can hang your hats and leave your lunch out here unless it is very cold. We also have some of the old playthings which I and every other child in those olden days used to play with. In the winter we had the skates. Here's a pair that is 135 years old, and here's a pair that's about 75 or 100. Here's the girls' skates over here with straps to hold them on. And here is the later skates, or the skates of the present time, where the shoe is fastened permanently to the skate. Otherwise, we had our own shoes on, and our skates were strapped and fastened to the shoes that we wore. We also have here a gooseneck sled, which was in popular use at that time. My sister had one, and I used to draw her to school, and she used to draw me, and we used to slide down a hill on these old gooseneck sleds. Now I'm going to open the door, and you can go inside and take any seat you want. And now we will go inside. When the children were about all seated, I didn't wait for them to play around. I took the school bell and started ringing it. They would all sit down quickly and look up to see. And when I got their attention, I started the story of the school. I grew up and went to one of these old schools for 8 or 9 years, and then I went on to another school. But if you was living around here for a mile and a half to the east, or a mile and a half to the west, or a mile and a half to the north or south, each of you every day would walk to school and bring your dinner pail, for we had no cafeteria in the old schools. You'd come to school from the time you started school, 5 or 6 years old, until you got through the 8th grade, or until you were 16 years of age. Now, it was up to you to come to school, walk to school, no buses, every day that the school was in session, no matter whether it rained or whether it snowed or storm or whatever. That was part of your daily life. Now I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the descriptions of the things on the wall. I'm going to start up here and tell you that the only lighting we had was these oil lamps put up in brackets around the room here. We did not have them lit very much. They were more for any entertainment or any gathering here at night. They do not reflect enough light out into the room, so it benefited the children very much. But here they are. And also you will find up in the ceiling, if you look up here, 4 hooks there. Now, the children ask me, what are those hooks for? Well, those hooks are put there so if they do have a gathering here at night, the men used to bring a lighted lantern, and when they got there, they would hang those up on the hooks, and that was for illumination for the room. Now, one thing that you will notice is different than any of the school that you've gone to now, and it has been changed some 25 years ago. In the old country school, you only had one teacher, one room, one teacher, and she taught the first grade. And when you completed the first grade, you would come back the second year and find the same teacher, and she would teach you in the second grade, in the first grade. That should teach you in the second grade. And so on, each year through. You would come back to the same school, and you would probably find the same teacher for maybe 3 years. Then a change would be. But the new teacher would still teach all the grades. She would teach the first grade, the second grade, the third grade, the fourth grade, the fifth grade, the sixth grade, the seventh grade, and the 8th grade, and get them ready for regents if they wanted to take the examinations. Now, you wonder how, and you teachers wonder how one teacher can teach 8 grades. Well, it was part of our work in school. We only had about 35 classes every day, and those classes from necessity had to be very short. So we were cramped with time. So we had to have our lessons in pretty good shape, recite fast, and then go back to your seat and go to studying. Now, the question that you will always ask me is the length of the school day. We got to school, and school started at 9 a.m. in the morning. It lasted until 12 o'clock, with a break of 15 minutes called recess, which I will tell you about later. Then, at 12 o'clock, you were free for 1 hour. You went to that dinner pail that you brought from home and opened it, and there you would find homemade bread, homemade butter, cookies, pie, maybe an apple or 2. All the things you brought from home and all the things your mother provided for you. If you didn't bring it, you didn't have anything to eat because there was no place, no cafeteria to help you. Now I'm going around the room just a little bit and tell you some of the contents that you see on the wall. You'll ask me what this rope here is for, so I'm going to pull on the rope. And if you will look at the ceiling of the room there, you will find two little trap doors. As I pull, they will open. Now that is our ventilating system. The bed foul air always goes heated and goes to the top of the room. And when the little trap doors are open, it goes up through into the attic. And we get rid of the foul air. That is the only things that we have. When I go over here to the old board, we'll find that this is a wooden board, about 2 feet and a half wide, and then above it is another one, the same width. It's nailed on there by the carpenter some 127 years ago, and then he painted it black, and that is called a blackboard, and that's how it's got its name. This board has been written on by the children for 101 years. Also, this one over here next to it, that is one of the original boards. They haven't been changed. But when I go to the next step, this next board over here, I find it slate. That was changed. The old wooden board was taken down, and they bought slate and put up there and made a slate board. What you write now, you call it a blackboard, but it's really a slate board. The name is changed because of what it was made of. Now, over here, too, we'll find some maps. This map here is about 115 years ago. It's a map of Niagara and Orleans County. One rather peculiar thing about this map is that it has all the roads on, and it has along the roads dots, and with names written after each dot. That tells you who was living here 115 years ago. If I look out of this window, I'll see this house over there. I can look on this map and tell you who was living in that house 115 years ago. Many men and women have come here and hunted up where their grandfathers or grandmothers was living in this county 115 years ago. Now we'll step over here into the corner. This next thing that we have on the wall here is the certificates that the teachers had to teach by. These teacher certificates go back to 1838, and they are, first of them, were all handwritten. They were not printed at all. It was not the hardest thing to get one of these old certificates. You went before 3 men, and they would ask you several questions. And if you was a pretty good-looking lady and had been to school for 8 or 9 years, and you was answering a few questions, they would give you a certificate to teach, but for only 1 year. And that was defined to teach in one room, one school for 1 year. And at the end of that year, you had to go back and get another one. This has been changed from year to year and always made a little more work for the pupil to get a certificate and become a teacher. And now you have to go 4 years beyond high school, or it would be about 8 years from the time you left the 8th grade in the old country school. Over here in the corner we see a little case of school books. We took some of our most precious books and put them in this here, and you can look at them because they're all open. But the paper is so brittle. Here is Daniel Webster's blueback spelling book, and it is he wrote when he was teaching school. This little book here only cost 19 cents, and it was sold by the millions it enabled him to keep his family for nearly 10 years while he was writing his dictionary. Besides these books that you see up here, we have about 400 in the library in the other rooms adjoining. We obtained these by writing in a teacher's magazine that we were building or outfitting a school and making a museum of it, and for the children to come and see the things. And I asked them to send me any old school books that they had about 1900 or earlier. And I had about 75 answers for that, and I received some 400 old school books, some of them going back to the year 1800. We have all kinds of school books, arithmetic, geography, spelling, reading books, and everything sent to us. Now we go on to the next place, and some of the children will want to know, well, did you have report cards as we have now for your mother and father to sign? No, we didn't have report cards in those old days. But if you had had a perfect lesson, we'll say, in spelling for 3 or 4 weeks and hadn't missed any words for 3 or 4 weeks, the teacher would give you a merit card. The merit card was just a little card, maybe 2 or 3 inches in size, and it told on there that you had been in attendance and had perfect lessons for such a length of time, and you received one of those. And the child at the end of the year who had the most merit cards was called the best scholar of the school. Moving along a little farther to the back of the room, here we find these old pictures of groups of school children. These are all pictures of children who attended this school, and under each picture the date is, they go way back to the 1880s in this school, and there's the groups of children. We would like to have the pictures of all the teachers that taught here, but we haven't. But it shows many of them. Here's 2 little boys standing on the front row down here. They're the Barnum boys, and they went to school here, and then they started school in other places, but they both entered the war, and they were both in the World War II. One of them was shot down and killed over Germany. The other one died on the beaches of Normandy. Coming over here one step farther, we have these shelves here with a bird's nest on eggs and things in there, rocks and things. This is the nature study that we had in those days. This was the same as your social science that you have today. The science work that you have today is much different. We could study anything we wanted to, anything that we could find specimens and bring in. We could study the trees, we could study the flowers, we could study the birds. And we used to wait to gather the bird's nest until fall, until the birds had got through with them. And then we always studied the bird's nest in the fall and winter. In the spring, we studied the flowers. We would bring specimens to school and study them, sometimes even try to draw or paint them. That was our nature study, as we called it. Cornell used to send each child a little pamphlet of maybe 24 pages about some certain thing, about the weather, about the trees, about the snowflakes, or things for the children to read through and keep and study. And then we would go to the next place over here, and we find a picture, a tin-type picture of Emily Hale. She was the first teacher in this school way back in 1849. It's a long ways back. Here's some of the letters she wrote, "Here's your certificate to teach in this school for 1 year." Stepping along the next place, we find some pictures, old-fashioned pictures that were in this school, and I put them up at the top. And underneath there, we have some of the work of the children, old magazines that are 40 or 50 years old that this teacher used to get ideas out of for maybe her artwork or drawing and things like that. Coming along a little bit farther, we have these flags up here. We have 4 different kinds of flags that we started out of before we had the regular flag that we know of today. Over here in the corner we have some stars over here. And then I usually ask the children, how many stars did we start with? Well, they're always easy and eager to tell me 13. That question is never missed. And then I'll ask them a little more about them and show them how the different ways they put them. And I'll ask them, where did they get the red, white, and blue flag? Why didn't we have a yellow, green, and purple flag instead of red, white, and blue? Well, we got our colors from the English flag because we had been under the English flag for a great many years. But we changed it. We didn't want the same, so we took out this little corner up here where it's blue, took the St. Andrew's cross and the crosses of England out of there, and there we put in our stars. And that's how the American flag got its start. Now just down below this, we find something else here. And these are stories written by the children quite a long while ago. Wouldn't you like to know whether your father and mother always had 100 on their papers? Wouldn't you like to get a hold of one of them that maybe wasn't perfect and show your mother and father that they never got 100 and everything? So we gathered what we can, but that is the hardest thing to find that we have in all our school work, is to find old school papers. But looking at this one, I know this girl that wrote this was in the 6th grade when she wrote it, but now she's a grandmother, so the paper must be old. It is a story of how the people traveled in the olden times. Here is a story written by Robert Draper, who went to school to me in Eagle Harbor. He became a truckman and he was killed in an accident. But here is his paper, something to show what he did a long, long while ago. It tells you how they traveled. Here is the old stagecoaches drawn by horses, for we had no railroads, no automobiles, no planes, no steamboats at first. We traveled by stagecoach, walked, or else we had to ride a horse. When we came to the river, there was no bridges, so they put them on these low, flat boats, and they were pulled across the river with ropes, and then the carriage would drive off the other side, the horses, and the carriage would be pulled ashore, and then they would go on their way. That's some of the stories that the children wrote in these olden times. Going a little farther here is something that not all schools had. And I was letting down a globe of the world fastened to a rope, and I let it down so the children can examine it and look at it. Now that gives them a good idea of the size and the shape and the position of the continents in relation to each other and the oceans which are in between them. They can see that if they go straight east from where we live now, they will strike southern Europe way over to the south and the Mediterranean Sea. Now, when they had studied this and they wanted to recite, the teacher pulled it up so they couldn't see it. and it was pulled up out of sight. And that was the first one, and that was used in this room here 100 years ago, or maybe 50 years ago, or maybe all that time in between. Over here we have one step farther. We find some of the drawings here up the top. You see little pictures here and drawings, and they're made into sort of books. And the books tell stories about Thanksgiving. Here's one, the cherry tree and a hatchet. The teacher was required to teach drawing as well as the other things of all the grades. Down below that is some problems that I got out of old books and out of examination papers. These here are the arithmetic work that they had to pass. At the end of the school year, if you wanted to go from the 4th grade into the 5th grade, the teacher was sent an examination paper from Albany. The teacher did not know what was on that examination paper until she opened it up and gave it to you children to do the examples. Then she couldn't give you easy examples. These were sent out of Albany. Now you had to take this examination and pass it to get into the next grade above you where you are. And they also had examination papers in the examination papers, you remember, were sent from Albany, and enough papers were sent for the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And each child took about 4 or 5 of those for promotion to the next grade. If you passed all of them, but say arithmetic, sometimes the teacher in those olden times would allow you to go from the 4th grade up to the 5th grade, but you would repeat your 4th grade work in arithmetic in the 4th grade, which would be a class different from the 5th grade. Now that is the way we progressed through our school examination. And those examination papers were held in January and in June. The teacher corrected the papers and made a report and sent it down to Albany. And that is how they knew whether you were doing good work or poor work in any of your subjects. Now we're going to step over here to the big board here on the front of the room. And this is the program that we used to have here. I told you that school started at 9 o'clock, and to be on time you had to be in your seat when the bell rang. Or if we didn't, we hurriedly got into our seat. You had one seat which you usually kept the whole year. Now notice that half of these seats are wide and double. 2 children sat in. In the olden times, they had 2 pupils in every seat, if they had enough children. Over to the left-hand side, on my left-hand side, you see one row of old desks there that were just the same kinds of desks as was made here in 1849. Or in other words, the carpenter that built this built these desks, and he fastened them down to the floor. And those were the desks they had. Your seat did not fold up. After using those for about 40 years, they were replaced by boughten seats, but still they held 2 children. The iron on the sides there, you can see, are from a factory. And the seat folds up. Your books are kept underneath, and the seat was much easier to sit in because they were curved and the back was curved. It didn't hurt your back so. And in the front of the desk, right in the middle, you see a hole in there. Now you'll be asking me what that hole is for. Well, the hole was simply a little inkwell fitted in there. We should have some glass inkwells, but I've been unable in all these years to find at least one of them. I've been promised them, but they just don't seem to turn up. Two children used to sit in one seat. Now usually it worked out this way. We would never put two fourth grades in that same seat, because they would, and they're having their arithmetic, both of them would probably have the same answer. One would copy from the other. Or in spelling, when they wrote their spelling out, they could look over on the other. So we put a fourth grade in with a seventh or eighth grade. And sometimes we would put a beginner, the first year child, in with a fifth grade. We would mix them up in that way. I remember when I started to school, my sister was 4 years older than I. And when I went, I sat in her seat. She was, and of course, in the fourth grade, and I was just starting in there. I was a little fellow, and my feet dangled from above the floor. She could reach the floor, but I couldn't. So they had little boxes like that very young children, and underneath their part of the seat would be a little box there to rest your feet on. And then we could go ahead and study. And when I was studying my reading lesson, and I found a word that I didn't know, I would just take my elbow and hunch my sister that, and I would point to the word which I wanted help on. And she knew what to do. She would look over on my book, and if the word was L-O-O-K-I-N-G, she would say, looking, quietly to me, and I would know that word, looking. Now she was my teacher in there. It helped me very much. And this is one of the helps and one of the advantages of the old school. Coming back to the front of the room and the program, you'll see at 9 o'clock, and after that is singing. All the children, no matter whether you was 6 years old or 16, we all sang, usually 2 or 3 verses. 2 or 3 songs. And then we would have a little world events sometimes. And then we would start in our regular work. Usually we had about 10 minutes to take the books out, get started, and the teacher would go around and answer questions. If you didn't know what your lesson was for today, she would tell you what your lesson was. And she would see that everybody got their book out and everybody started to study. And within a few minutes she would tap on the bell and she would say, the first grade reading class. For those that started in school for the first year had a little Swinton's primer. And they would bring their primer and leave their seat where they had been studying and come up to this long seat on the front. This long seat was called the recitation seat. And the people were reciting. They were telling the teacher what they had learned while studying. Now the first one was the reading class. We always started with the smaller reading classes. And she would hear the first grade read over their reading lesson out loud. They would stand up, read out loud, and the teacher would have each one do that. And each would read to them, to the teacher. And the teacher had a book, so she knew whether they were reading right or not. At the same time, it was the teacher's duty to watch 7 grades more in the back of the room which should be studying. And if she didn't find them studying, or someone that wasn't studying, she would point at them with a finger and maybe snap her fingers, calling their attention to their work. Now, when this class got through, she gave them out their lesson for the next class and sent them back to the seat and tap on her bell again and say the second grade reading. All those back there, 7 grades, would be studying. The one up in front would be reciting. This gave you more time to study and less time to recite. Our classes were small, and usually we didn't have more than 5 minutes for some class, maybe with only 2 or 3 in it. And sometimes we had 10 or 15 minutes if they were the 8th grade and more in the class. We kept this up all day. The children studying and the teacher hearing classes recite. By the time we got to about 10:30, we had 15 minutes of recess. She would tap on the bell and she'd say, "Now it's recess time," and the children would always go outdoors in the good weather and play games. Or if it's in the winter time, they would play games inside the school. And in 15 minutes, the school bell rang again, and everyone came in from the outside or took their seat if they were inside, and they started studying again. This went on from about 11:15 until 12 o'clock. And in the forenoon, you had your reading classes and you had your arithmetic classes. That's about all we got in the forenoon. And that took us up until 12 o'clock. Now, it only took about 15 minutes for a child to get, as we used to say, eat up what little food that we brought, and it was enough for a child there from home. And then they were ready to play, and that gave about 3/4 of an hour, 45 minutes to play. We went into the backyard, and the big and the little played together in the games. Unless they had a very large school, they'd all play together. Now, what did we play? You could play anything, any kind of a game you wanted to. The children chose their own game. The teacher wasn't out there. She wouldn't come out. She was busy inside correcting papers, getting work ready for the afternoon, getting those arithmetic lessons all corrected and handed back so you could correct them before you went home at night. She wouldn't appear unless there was a quarrel or fighting or some trouble out there. Then she used to come out and separate them and maybe bring in one or both of them and set them down inside and make them go to study. At 1 o'clock the bell would ring and they would come in again, and they started the afternoon study and recitation by the little folks. The first grade readers would read again. You read twice a day in the first, second, and third, and fourth grades usually. Then after that, time the reading classes is over, usually it was close to recess time in the afternoon. Then the little folks, the first 3 grades, who had all their work finished, could go home if they wanted to, if they lived close at home or close to the school, not very far away. But most of them came a distance, and they didn't go home. They stayed there until 4 o'clock and went home with the older children, because some of them had to walk a mile, and they usually went with the older children. So what did they do after recess, the last half of the afternoon? The little children could go outdoors if the weather was good, and they could play whatever games they wanted to. Or if it was in the winter, they went over into this corner over here, and here you see a little low table, and with chairs made out of orange crates. And the children over there played with these blocks, put this puzzle together, or looked at these picture books here, And notice that this one is a colored picture book, but it's all made out of cloth, so it would last several years. Now we're coming back over here to our program again. After recess, there was the time when the older children, she would only have the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and then they would have their work. They would have their English work. They would have their geography work. They would have their spelling work. And you recited in one class and hurried back to your seat and studied on the thing that was coming first. After your English work, you knew that the geography. So when you went back to your seat, you studied your geography until your geography class. And when your geography class was over, then you went back to your seat and studied your spelling. Because last thing before school was out, you had your spelling classes. And that took us up to 4 o'clock. Now, we had more time to study than you do in your classes today, maybe. The recitation was short, but the teacher was right on the job. The spelling was looked over and you had to correct your paper if you missed, and you would have to write them out 5 or 10 times and spell them to the teacher after your class. Or the arithmetic had to be corrected. The reading, she kept track of you. I think the teacher knew a little bit more about the amount that the child was learning than they do in the schools today. Now we want to step to one more thing here, and that is this case here. Here is children's playthings, things that they had to play with in those olden days. Now we did not have as much money to play with. I went to school to a place way out in the country, and if I went to town, Alvin, I had to drive 7 miles, and we only come there once a month maybe. We didn't have very much money, so we didn't have many bought toys. We get maybe 1 or possibly 2 at Christmas time, but those weren't usually brought to school. But in school we made a great many of our own. I would ask my mother for the spool, the wooden spool the thread was come on, and when it was empty she would give it to me. I'd take my jackknife and I would whittle off about half of it down to a point, shape it down to a point, and then I would take another little stick of wood and fit it in there and make a point on that, and with a little handle on the top, and then I would take it and spin it, and we had a top, and then we used to race our tops, see who could make a top that would spin the longest. Those are some of the things. In here you see other things in here. Here is some dominoes made out of paper cardboard. We have things that was whittled out, little animals that was whittled out for the boys. Here's a chain that was whittled out of 1 stick of wood, and you see how the little links are all hooked together, and a little hook on one end and a ring on the other. It took a lot of whittling, a lot of experience, and you broke a lot of those before you got a chain whittled out that was perfect. Here is a ball. I didn't have any bought baseballs to play with until I got to be 12 or 13 years old. I didn't have the money and any place to buy them, so we used to make them. I would ask my mother for string. Save all your string. I want all your string. And in the winter time and by spring I would have quite a lot of string, and I would wind it together just as tight as I could into a little round ball until it got nearly the size of an orange, or as big a ball as I wanted to. And then I would take the top of somebody's shoes, an old shoe that wasn't worth anything, and the top of the leather is a little bit softer, and I would cut out a chunk of that, and I would soak it in water overnight, and then I would take in the morning that ball of string and put it in that on the top of that leather, and I would cut it off in pie shape, V shape, And if you cut it out with the wide end down to the bottom and bring it up and wrap it over there, you'll find that that wide three-cornered piece will reach up to the center. And then you make 4 of those. Then you bring another one up over there, just the same shape until it meets. And then the third one, and then the third one, and then the fourth one. And by that you'll have the ball all covered. And because the leather is soaked up, you can take a string and usually on a coarse needle or a very heavy black thread and sew those together, and you have a ball. And then I will bounce it on the floor and it'll bound back up. It was not as hard as the bottom ball, but those are the things that we used and made in school. Then we had other little things that we played with. We had one little puzzle which was very ingenious. It was just a little stick with a string tied, one string tied to one end there, and it went through a hole in the center and around back up to another hole in there on the other side. And on each side of those there was a loop left, and then in that loop was a little button, and in each of those there was a little button, and one button in one loop and one button on the other side. Now the trick was to pass one button over to where the other button was, but the hole in the center was so small it wouldn't go through there. You couldn't untie it, you couldn't cut it, but you could pass the button through over to the other side if you knew how. Now that was a puzzle, and it kept you busy for a long time, and it even stumped some of the bigger folks how to do it. We had many other things that we made. We had many whistles. Instead of buying them in the spring, out of the willow limbs, we would make whistles. They made very good whistles. We'd whistle them out with our jackknife and take the bark off from one section of it, cut a channel in there, and a hole for the air to go in the front of it and into this channel and come out in another hole there, and we made a fairly good whistle. The only thing is they would dry out. Probably the thing is, though, that children enjoyed more than anything else was those tumbling blocks. And they are very ingenious. Blocks that are about an inch and a half wide and about 2 inches long, and they're together from one to another by little bands of sort of rubber. And as you tip this over there, apparently the block that you touch next below the one you hold in your hand will fall down and go way down to the bottom. And then you tip it back and then tip it over again, and they continually appear to fall down there. The children used to like to make those. I never let them play with mine there too long because they would soon get it out of order. The strings had to be arranged in just, or the rubber bands had to be in such a order. Now those are some of the things that we had in children's time to play with. Most of them were manufactured right at home. Sometimes your father would help you whittle out some of these things or make them if you couldn't. We always liked to bring a new puzzle to school because we could do it, the rest of them couldn't do it. And we wouldn't tell them for a long while how to solve or do that. Another question that they had was a little bit of conundrums and stories and things like that. When we ever had time, or if it was very rainy day in the winter time at recess, the teacher would have some things on their mind that they could amuse the children by. There's one thing that I always like to spring on the children was this. There's a little story about a boy and some ducks. The little boy had some ducks, and another boy asked him, "How many ducks have you got, Davy?" Well, he says, "I've got one duck, I've got two ducks ahead of a duck, I've got two ducks behind a duck, and I've got one duck in the middle. Now, how many ducks did Davy had? Now, all the school would try it. There might be 50 children there that day, and they would have the answers anywhere from 1 till 10 there. I used to let them raise their hands, and I'd never tell them who was right and wrong, and they would ask. Now, the first time around, there wouldn't be maybe any. Sometimes there was one or two that had the right answer. I would say, well, we'll have to have it again. Now, how many ducks did Davy have? He had two ducks ahead of a duck. He had two ducks behind a duck. And he had one duck in the middle. How many ducks did he have? The common answer was 5, but of course 5 wasn't right, 6 wasn't right, or 4 wasn't right, and 7 wasn't right. They would guess all kinds. Sometimes someone would say 3 ducks, which was the right answer, but I wouldn't tell them. I'd do that 2 or 3 times. Usually the one that had 3 the next time around, they'd be guessing some other number, and they wouldn't have it right. But finally I would show them on the board how it was, putting 3 dots on the board and say, these 2 over here are ahead of the last one. There are 2 ducks ahead of a duck. And then the head duck, then he's got 2 ducks behind the duck, and he's got 1 duck in the middle. So he only had 3 ducks. Now that amused the children, and they had many good times over that. Another thing the children used to like here was tongue twisters, and sometimes I would ask them if they knew any tongue twisters and conundrums and things like that. One of them I used to tell them was, well, good morning, madam, to Eve said Adam, good morning, sir, to him said she. After a while they would get on to that, so I would say, you seem to be early or late. You used to be behind before, but now you're first at last. Those are the things that amused the children. It gave them a little pleasure in going to school. Or I would wind up by saying, this one, a fly and a flea and a flue were in prison. Now what could they do? Said the fly, let us flee, said the fly, so they flew through a flaw in the flue. At that time they would be all laughing and want me to say it again. So I would say, a flea and a fly and a flue were in prison. Now what could they do? Said the fly, let us flee, said the fly, so they flew through a flaw in the flue. Those are some of the tongue twisters which children. And we also had some songs that we used to sing, like Old Grumble, and Spring once said to the nightingale. Now, it would be a shame to stop the school and not give the children the time to ask some questions. They always wanted to ask questions. They always wanted to know certain things about the old school. Someone had told them. And then one of the questions they would always ask, well, what about a dunce block? Dunce hat? Where's the dunce stool? Did you have it? I said, no, I don't remember ever seeing a dunce cap or dunce stool when I went to school. And I went to school way back before 1900, too. But in the old schools, 150 years old, they did have dunce caps and dunce stools and things. But this time someone, and it'd usually be a boy, would say, oh, what about, did you get lickings in school? Did the teacher punish you? I'd say, yes, the teacher punished you. The teacher had a right, and it is her duty. And lots of them thought she wasn't a good teacher. She didn't punish some a little bit. Now, by this time, some little bright boy would ask me, well, did you ever get any punishment when you went to school? And I would smile and say, yes, I got punished 3 times by the same teacher when I was quite a young boy. And I'll have to tell you about it, won't I? So I would say, she made a rule that when we was in school, we could not throw anything in the school. Well, that was all right. when school was in session, we couldn't throw anything. We seldom did. But sometimes the teacher didn't get there. And in the winter time, we used to get to school before the teacher did. She would only get there just a little bit before 9, and sometimes we would get there 10 or 15 minutes earlier. One day I was throwing up my mitten in school. It was in the winter, and I had mittens, and I threw it up, and I was catching it, so coming down. I kept throwing it up, catching it, and coming down. I threw one up, and the teacher walked in, and when the mitten come down, I caught it. And she see who was throwing the mitten, so she whipped me for that, although school hadn't started. I didn't say anything. I took my whipping, but in after years, I kind of got caught up with her. She was my teacher, but I taught in Barry Center, and I was teaching there in the large room, and she was teaching in the small room, so she was under me, but I never twitted her or whipping me when I was a little boy in the school. I never said anything to her, but I should have, maybe. Now I get the signal from your bus driver that the time is for you to load up. So if you children will pick up your things, do not leave any of your things here, your hats and coats and things, because I find many of them, and fall in line, and you can go out to your bus and load up and return to your school. And I hope you'll have a good time, and sometime maybe you will be able to come back to the old rural school of cobblestones at Childs, New York. Have any piano in any school that I taught in. Now they asked me about many things. They would ask me about those flags over there. Who made them? Well, I'd say, I told you about Robert Draper. This little girl lives over west of Albion. They run a golf course over there now. She was the one that became the grandmother. It's hard to find those. And those flags up there, now I'm going to ask you a question or two about them. How many stars do we have now?